Hi, this is Mark Bondurant with Independent RX Consulting. Today the topic is payroll. In today's pharmacy world, we're frequently met with decreased reimbursements, which makes our gross margin shrink. And sometimes it leaves us feeling somewhat helpless that there's nothing we can do to increase that bottom line when we continually see our margins shrink. But as we get to the expense column of the P&L, we see that our payroll expense in most pharmacies is larger than all other expenses put together. So as we look to see what can we do in this era of shrinking reimbursements, we have to look at our largest expense, which is payroll, and how do we keep that under control? So I'm frequently asked, how do you make sure that you're staffing the stores correctly? In the past, a way to do that would be to say, what is a ratio of prescriptions filled per technician hour? So in a typical store filling maybe 1,200 prescriptions a week, we could use a ratio of 8 and say, let's divide our prescriptions filled per week, 1,200, by a ratio of 8, and net out that we would see we need 150 technician hours to keep our staff correct. And while that's an easy way to do it, I don't feel it's the effective way. What I like to do is set a payroll as a percent of sales. Because when you set payroll as a percent of sales, when there's changing market conditions and you see the decreased reimbursements decreasing your sales, you can more quickly adapt to that changing condition and make sure that your payroll is in line with what you need. Typically in a store, a goal should be 10% of your sales should be in payroll. That could be anywhere from 10 to 12, but for today's discussion, let's use 10%. So how do we manage to get our payroll at 10% of sales? The first step is knowing what is the effective rate that you are paying your staff. Now what that means is, let's say you have a technician that makes $15 an hour. But that person also has health insurance, has a couple weeks vacation, maybe some other benefits, payroll taxes. So while you're paying that person $15 an hour, you can see by the chart that that person's effective rate is really $19.54 an hour. And this is the number that we're concerned with, because non-benefited people's hours are not the same as a benefited hour. So we find the effective rate for each one of our technicians. Then collectively, we look at that effective rate over all the hours and we get an average effective rate for a technician. So for sake of discussion, we'll say that that came out to be $14. So how do we set our budget? We set our budget by starting, what is our weekly sales? And we find that on any one of our pharmacy system reports or from the accounting and say this is our typical weekly sales. From there we apply our percent that's our goal. Let's say in this case 10%. So the first thing we find out is in the example that you see on your screen, our weekly sales were $59,400. We have a payroll goal of 10%. That means each week we have $5,940 to spend on payroll. From that, we know that we cannot run a pharmacy without a pharmacist. So we take the total amount of hours that are open, or the total amount of pharmacist time that we plan to use, multiply that by their effective rate, and subtract that from our total. When we subtract our total pharmacist pay from the total, that's what's left over for everyone else in your store, whether they be technician, clerks, drivers, so forth. Since we've already determined what is the effective rate of all non-pharmacist personnel, we can now say we have, in this case, $2,300 to spend on someone that's not a pharmacist. We know that the effective rate for that is $14 an hour, which leaves us 164 hours that we can schedule. If you use this plan, you will always be on budget with your payroll, and you'll control the most expensive expense that you'll have in your store, and it will lead to greater profits and enable you to have great cash flow. If you have more questions about setting a payroll budget, be sure to contact your independent RX representative, and we'll be glad to go over it with you.